Caitlin Clark had every reason to complain. But instead, she chose a path that left everyone stunned. Indianapolis felt like a different place on Friday night. It's the kind of evening when you stop chatting, stop scrolling, and just observe. Almost no one in the history of basketball had ever done what Caitlin Clark was doing on a court. And by the time the last buzzer went out, everyone in the basketball world was still processing what they had just seen. 45 points, 2 blocks for steals, and 10 assists. Only 4 other players in all of professional basketball, men's or women's, had ever recorded a stat line as uncommon and historically ridiculous as this one. Even though she was still playing under a minute limit, she completed it in less than 30 minutes. She had not yet lifted her own coaching staff. You appreciate this content? Consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Believe it or not, more than 85% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. It's free and only takes a second, but it means the world to us. So, did you subscribe already? Great! Thank you so much for your support. Now, back to the video. Analysts were drawing analogies to Michael Jordan. The name Luka Doncic was being mentioned. Social media was at a loss for words to explain what had just transpired. For a single evening, Caitlin Clark's entire existence revolved around basketball. What she did on the floor, what it meant for the record books, and what it said about where her career was heading. Then Saturday arrived 90 seconds later. The whole conversation took that long to turn around. Clark ran into a hard screen set by Liberty center John Cale Jones. 90 seconds into Indiana's subsequent game against the New York Liberty, she dropped to the ground. She searched for the foul call. It never materialized. She stood up, spoke to the closest official, and was immediately given a technical foul before the game had even begun. She had already spent $1,000 on her 6th of the season. And before she had even settled into her second game of the weekend, the league fined its most watched athlete. How can a sport go from making history on a Friday to punishing the same individual who achieved it less than a day later? That inquiry didn't land softly, it landed hard. The game was won by the Fever. Indiana easily defeated a Liberty squad that had defeated them earlier in the season, 108-88, with the 33 points from Kelsey Mitchell. For a team with 15 wins and 10 losses, vying for a spot in a conference that had become more competitive every week, it was by all accounts a solid road victory with playoff implications. However, the victory hardly made the news. The technical was what registered. The fine was what was registered. The maths was what registered. 2 more to go before a required night off. 6 down. And the fact that after celebrating one of the best individual performances in women's basketball history the night before, supporters spent the next night tallying fouls like a suspension clock. It wasn't an accident that caused whiplash. For many who had been paying careful attention throughout the season, it wasn't an unfortunate coincidence or poor timing. One contentious whistle at a time. It was the most recent phase of something that had been developing for months. This story really begins in June. So, you have to go back there to understand why Saturday seemed like the most recent explosion in a much longer conflagration against the Phoenix Mercury. Clark committed a technical foul in a game that many spectators and commentators quickly deemed to be borderline at best. Referees swallow the intensity of a physical moment and go on without making it a moment. This is the type of call that most players forget. However, it did not vanish. After reviewing it, the WNBA upheld it rather than rescinding it as it had done for other players earlier in the season. Not because a single technical foul is disastrous, but rather because of what it showed about how Clark's condition was being handled in comparison to everyone else on the floor. That one choice set off the fire. Fans took notice right away. Within hours, screenshots of the ruling began to circulate. Side-by-side comparisons abound on social media timelines. Players who behaved similarly or more roughly on the court. None of the players were receiving the same degree of scrutiny or the same disciplinary consequences despite having similar levels of frustration and having said or done far more in the heat of the moment. In the same season, why does a call that is rescinded for one player stand for another? Every subsequent technical foul was viewed through the prism of that question which persisted. Fans weren't reacting to any poor calls by the time the 6th technical came around in July. They were responding to a file they had been developing since the spring. Box score by box score, screenshot by screenshot. Every contested whistle was compiled, examined, and compared to a trend they were becoming more and more certain the league was either unable to recognize or was refusing to confront. Clark suffered more than just a fine as a result of the June call. A fan base that had already been paying close attention to and was now doing so with a magnifying glass cost the league the benefit of the doubt. The fact that no one else has been willing to publicly address this issue makes it more difficult to write it off as fan annoyance or internet chatter. Indiana's head coach is Stephanie White. She doesn't have a fan account. She is not an unaccountable social media commentator. As a professional coach, she must carefully manage her squad and discuss officiating in a way that doesn't cause further issues with the league office. Even after an earlier technical, she told reporters that there needs to be discussions about being more strategic with how those fouls are used against her own player in order to solve the problem. Take a close look at that. Speaking on the record, a head coach acknowledged that Clark's relationship with WNBA officiating has evolved into something the organization needs to actively manage, not something they hope disappears or dismiss as an overreaction from the internet, but something they are strategically planning around. You can see how bad the problem has become within the company itself when the coaching staff of a team chooses their words so carefully when discussing a pattern this obvious in public. The national media has also been observing. The dynamic surrounding Clark's treatment has been described by pundits from prominent sports sources using terms like political tug-of-war. One week she was hailed as the league's top attraction. The next she was clearly more disciplined than her colleagues. The league loses control of the narrative once that framing leaves WNBA-specific media and enters more general sports discourse. The dialogue takes charge of itself. The story has developed to the point that casual fans who had never given technical foul procedures a second thought are now questioning uniformity and fairness. A fan base's strongly worded tweet is not the same as that kind of pressure. That is the league's reputation being shaped in real time by a dialogue that it did not initiate and is unable to ignore. Check out Clark's position in the league's technical foul rankings. And it becomes even more difficult to interpret the image. She is presently tied with Kahleah Copper for second place in the league behind only Angel Reed. These three players' games don't appear quite identical. Reed is a big presence on the inside who attracts aggressive play and plays with an edge. Copper is a fierce two-way guard who never stops going after the hoop. Clark is a perimeter playmaker whose approach is more focused on passing, shooting, and spacing than on the kind of emotionally charged contact-heavy play that would often result in a high number of technical fouls. So why by the middle of the season are three such desperate players in the same disciplinary bracket? It is more difficult than it seems to explain the shared number as a coincidence. It raises concerns, and when those questions aren't satisfactorily addressed, fans fill the void with their own conclusions. Conclusions that don't support the league office. In response to that quiet, the fan community produced something astonishingly structured for something that had no official framework at all. There is now an instantaneous wave of real-time commentary and documentation for each technical foul. In order to determine whether Clark has committed a foul that brings her closer to the threshold, fans specifically refresh the box scores mid-aim. Screenshot threads that provide video footage and timestamps for each disputed call. Postings that compare Clark's history of technical fouls to those of players whose behavior is objectively comparable or worse. This isn't sporadic venting. This fan base has successfully transformed into a fact-checking department. They are well organized, tenacious, and totally reluctant to let anyone call go unanswered. What does it mean for a league office to have a public record of every choice it takes because so many people are watching its games? Even in the absence of a formal campaign, petition, or spokesperson, that kind of persistent documented attention is a form of pressure in and of itself. Every time a new chapter is added, it just continues to exist and expand. All of this has a financial component as well, which merits more examination than it usually receives. Before the season began, the WNBA discreetly reorganized its excellence system. Technical fouls 4 through 7 each incur a $1,000 penalty under the new system, a significant increase from the $200 starting point of prior seasons. In actuality, it lands differently depending on who is anchoring the fouls, even if that alteration was applied universally. The financial cost of frustration has been rising sharply and swiftly for a player like Clark, who is getting closer to the threshold than nearly everyone else in the league. A professional athlete might be able to afford $1,000 for each technical foul. However, the dollar quantity isn't the core problem. It's what the league's priorities are revealed by the structure. The entire responsibility is transferred to the player when the cost of player annoyance increases while the calls that cause it remain the same. In essence, it claims that raising the cost of responding to inconsistency is the solution. Supporters who think the officiating issue is the root cause rather than the outcome of Clark's actions have taken note of this approach. Clark hasn't presented this as a personal complaint. She has been particularly cautious about that, constantly guiding the discussion away from specific calls and toward a structural argument. Her request, which she has made repeatedly in public throughout the season, is to replace the league's present part-time officiating setup with full-time refs. It's a significant distinction. She is not requesting special treatment. She is not requesting that the league reverse certain rulings in her favor. She is arguing that improving officiating inconsistencies will benefit everyone on the floor, not just herself, and that it is essentially a staffing and infrastructural issue. Her perspective gains credence from that argument that would not come from sheer irritation. The entire discussion is changed from Clark believing she receives too many technical fouls to Clark believing the league's officiating system has to be improved. These are two quite different points of contention. Furthermore, it is far more difficult for the league office to reject the second one without appearing to be refusing to address a problem that can be resolved. What would happen then if the eighth technical showed up when the drama is removed? The mechanics are simple. The WNBA immediately suspends Clark for one game when she commits her ninth technical penalty of the regular season. A forced night on the bench, a $1,500 fine, no hearing, and no appeal that modifies the decision. That would be a hassle for the majority of players on the majority of teams during the majority of seasons. It would be far more serious for the Fever at the moment. With 15 wins and 10 defeats, Indiana is involved in a postseason fight in a conference that has become much more competitive as the season has gone on. Every night, Clark averages almost 8 assists, 4 rebounds, and nearly 21 points. She is more than just the greatest player for Indiana. She is the focal point of the Fever's offensive strategy. The player whose ability to produce open looks for her teammates significantly alters the defense's tactics, and the player whose shooting range alone necessitates changes that no other member of the team can make in the same manner. If you take her out of the game, the Fever won't simply lose. In the midst of a stretch where every game has playoff significance, they are implementing a completely different offense with just 48 hours notice. Without months of practice and preparation centered around a new strategy, how can a team rewire its entire offensive identity so quickly? To be honest, it doesn't. Not without expense, not in a tidy manner. However, Indiana's one-loss record wouldn't be the only harm caused by a suspension. This season, Clark has contributed something to every game that the league has been attempting to produce for years. Increased broadcast viewership, increased attendance, and a degree of widespread national interest that women's basketball has traditionally found difficult to maintain on a regular basis. Every arena she goes to is sold out. Her appearances are cited by broadcasters as dependable sources of audience. The league has publicly acknowledged that her presence has accelerated the sport's growth in ways that go well beyond what could have been achieved with a single marketing effort. A player suspension costs more than simply one night. At a time when casual fans are more interested in women's basketball than ever before, it costs the league one of its most dependable draws. In terms of the viewership it loses alongside her, is the WNBA truly ready for what a suspended night looks like? That is no longer a hypothetical. It is a live inquiry that is just 2 technical errors away from being answered. From now on, fans have begun to view every technical foul as a separate isolated drama. During Fever games, box scores are updated in real time to check if Clark has committed a foul that advances the counter. Observing her encounters with officials with a degree of forensic scrutiny uncommon even in a postseason series. Every time she speaks to a referee following a call, there's a brief pause on social media before fans learn whether or not it had any impact. Everyone engaged, even Clark herself, gets worn out by that type of prolonged, granular concentration. She is a rival. She plays with passion and energy because that's what top-tier competitive basketball requires. Few players in any sport have had to deal with the psychological strain of managing that intensity in public. Not only with the game on the line, but also with a suspension clock running in the background. With so much riding on each whistle, how many players in any professional league are expected to control their emotional reactions with such caution? There aren't many answers. Additionally, those who are typically have something in common. They have the greatest institutional weight, the largest audiences, and the most well-known names. This immediately returns the topic of discussion to Clark. She shouldn't be excused for legitimate technical fouls based on any of this. No one is arguing that the league finds the debate more straightforward and uncomfortable. That at this precise time, the margin for error has grown dangerously tiny. There has never been a better performance from her. The stakes are bigger than ever for everyone in her immediate vicinity, including teammates, coaches, broadcasters, and the league itself. Is it fair to expect any athlete, much less the most scrutinized one in the sport, to play with so little space between a forced night off and her greatest season? The picture becomes more dire when you consider what Clark has already had to endure in order to reach this stage of the season. Due to injury concerns, her coaching staff had to impose a minutes restriction at the beginning of the season, which is currently in effect since her freshman season. There has been discussion and documentation of the physical touch she receives every night. A degree of interaction that has sparked a different discussion concerning the officials' consistent application of the law in relation to her defense. Add to that a fine structure that penalizes her more severely with each call, a suspension threshold that is 2 technical fouls away, and a league office that has not publicly addressed the structural issues she continues to bring up. One player at a time is under a great deal of pressure, and it's arriving at what ought to be one of her career's most joyous moments. A week that began with a remarkable 45-10 assist performance quickly turned into a countdown to a fine and suspension. There is no subtle difference between those two. It is precisely this kind of contradiction that gives the impression that a story is more expansive than any one moment inside it. No club should have to cope with this kind of divided attention during a playoff push. According to the Fever fan base, watching a counter and waiting to see if this is the whistle that changes everything is a part of every game, as is simply watching basketball right now. That is the undercurrent that permeates every newscast from Indiana. A tension that didn't exist a season ago, and it only exists because the people with the power to provide a clear conclusion have allowed the PR. It all comes down to one main question. Does the WNBA intend to respond to Caitlin Clark with not by making a declaration, not with a modification to the fine structure hidden in the text of a league memo? Give her a real response. Respond to her public and repeated claims that the officiating inconsistency is a systemic issue with a structural remedy in a way that demonstrates the league has acknowledged her concerns and is taking significant action. Because the current approach has been quiet and fines, and if silence and fines are imposed regularly enough, they begin to resemble a policy since spring. Fans have been keeping track of every whistle, and they won't stop. The media focus that began with WNBA coverage has permeated popular sports discourse and is not abating. Furthermore, Clark hasn't shown any signs of relaxing her stance or abandoning the public dispute she has been making throughout the season. That is pressure coming from 3 different sources at the same time: the player, the commentators, and the fans. The league office has yet to come up with a solution that won't exacerbate the issue or make it more obvious. At 2, the countdown is underway. After 2 additional technical errors, the topic of discussion shifts from potential outcomes to actual events. After 2 more whistles, the most watched player in the league will sit on the bench for a game that will be reported as the conclusion of a narrative that has been developing since June rather than as a typical disciplinary consequence. All of Indiana's remaining games are important for the playoffs. All possessions are important, and each and every one of those games was predicated on the idea that Clark would be on the floor leading an offense that only functions as intended when she is in the middle of it. The pressure is already there. Regardless of whether the 8th technical shows up in the next 2 weeks or not, the space is already filled with the question it poses. A league that has publicly credited one player for changing the sport's commercial and cultural trajectory for the past 2 seasons is now only 2 whistles away from benching that same player in the midst of a playoff race. Furthermore, the viewers are not perplexed by what that might entail. All they are doing is waiting to find out if the league is. The record has been established by the fan community. The story has been constructed by the media. Clark has presented her case. The only unanswered question at this point is whether the WNBA is genuinely paying attention or if it will simply continue to pay fines and hope that the clamor eventually subsides. It won't. Let know in the comments if you believe the WNBA owes Clark a genuine response to this. Additionally, if you found this analysis thought-provoking, be sure to subscribe because this narrative is far from